Today's story is from a book called There Is a Boy in the Girls' Bathroom by Louis Sachar. Bradley Chalkers, a fifth grader at the Red Hill School, has trouble getting along with his classmates until he meets Carla, a new school counsellor. She not only listens to his wacky stories, but encourages him to use his powerful imagination. But when Bradley's social world begins to broaden, the school board decides to let Carla go. What's going to happen to him now? This heartwarming story of a young boy's search for friendship and acceptance is one of Louis Sachar's most popular novels, and readers will identify with Bradley's troubles and eventual transformation when he finds a friend in Carla. So here are your comprehension questions. Number 1. Where does Bradley Chalkers sit in the classroom? Number 2. How do Bradley's classmates react when Jeff is asked to sit next to Bradley? And number 3. Describe the state of Bradley's desk. Chapter 1. Bradley Chalmers sat at his desk in the back of the room, last seat, last row. No one sat at the desk next to him, or the one in front of him. He was an island. If he could have, he would have sat in the closet. Then he could shut the door so he wouldn't have to listen to Mrs. Ebble. He didn't think she'd mind. She'd probably like it better that way too. So with the rest of the class. All in all, he thought everyone would be much happier if he sat in the closet, but unfortunately his desk did not fit. "Class," said Mrs. Ebble, "I would like you all to meet Jeff Fishkin. Jeff has just moved here from Washington, D.C., which, as you know, is our nation's capital." Bradley looked up at the new kid who was standing at the front of the room next to Mrs. Ebble. "Why don't you tell the class a little bit about yourself, Jeff?" urged Mrs. Ebble. The new kid shrugged. "There's no reason to be shy," said Mrs. Ebble. The new kid mumbled something, but Bradley couldn't hear what it was. "Have you ever been in the White House, Jeff?" Mrs. Ebble asked. "I'm sure the class would be interested to hear about that." "No, I've never been there," the new kid said very quickly as he shook his head. Mrs. Ebble smiled at him. "Well, I guess we'd better find you a place to sit." She looked around the room. I don't see any place except, I suppose you can sit there at the back." "Not next to Bradley," a girl in the front row exclaimed. "At least it's better than in front of Bradley," said the boy next to her. Mrs. Ebble frowned. She turned to Jeff. "I'm sorry, but there are no other empty desks." "Don't mind where I sit," Jeff mumbled. "Well, nobody likes sitting there," said Mrs. Ebble. "That's right," Bradley spoke up. "Nobody likes sitting next to me." He smiled a strange smile. He stretched his mouth so wide it was hard to tell whether it was a smile or a frown. He stared at Jeff with bulging eyes as Jeff awkwardly sat down next to him. Jeff smiled back at him, so he looked away. As Mrs. Ebble began the lesson, Bradley took out a pencil and a piece of paper and scribbled most of the morning, sometimes the paper and sometimes on his desk. Sometimes he scribbled so hard his pencil point broke. Every time that happened, he laughed. Then he'd tape the broken point to one of the gobs of junk on his desk, sharpen his pencil and scribble again. His desk was full of little wads of torn paper, pencil points, chewed erasers, and other unrecognisable stuff, all taped together. And here are the answers to your questions. Number 1. Bradley Chalkers sits at his desk at the back of the room, specifically the last seat of the last row. Number 2. One girl in the front row exclaims, "No, not next to Bradley," while a boy next to her comments, "At least he's better off in front of Bradley." They express their reluctance to have Jeff sit next to Bradley at all. And number 3, Bradley's desk is full of little wads of torn paper, broken pencil points, chewed erasers, and other unrecognisable items all taped together. It's very cluttered and it's very messy. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed that, and if you have any stories that you would like to hear on the next deal, please do let me know.